What if Obi-Wan joined Anakin on Mustafar? These two characters are Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi. At one point, Obi-Wan was Anakin's master, and Anakin was a Padawan learner to Obi-Wan. During the Clone Wars following Anakin's apprenticeship, the pair worked closely together on many missions and were both renowned across the galaxy for their skills in military command. However, sadly, prior to Order 66, Anakin fell to the dark side and became Darth Vader. Anakin confronted Obi-Wan later in Revenge of the Sith and asked that they join forces, which Obi-Wan declines. They had an epic battle and Anakin ends up losing and becoming entombed in the classic black suit. However, how might things have gone if Obi-Wan had joined Anakin during the fight on Mustafar? That's the topic we'll be dealing with today. Call me a Sith, because there are going to be a lot of absolutely amazing parts of this new story. So grab your bowl of bantha stew, settle into your couch, and let's get right into it. Our story begins on Mustafar, where Anakin has just discovered that Obi-Wan stowed away on Padme's ship. Anakin still chokes Padme and she falls to the ground unconscious. Obi-Wan rails on Anakin, telling him that he's been seduced by a Dark Lord into doing evil things for a twisted agenda. Anakin retorts, blasting Obi-Wan for his allegiance to a treasonous organization. He also absolutely slams Obi-Wan when he says that his allegiance is to the Republic and to democracy, reminding Obi-Wan that Palpatine was a democratically elected head of state who was a Jedi had unceremoniously tried to depose. Obi-Wan stops to consider this momentarily before Anakin drops the infamous "if you're not with me, then you're my enemy" line. Obi-Wan also had some growing frustrations with the Jedi way. After all, he'd followed it for his whole life and all that it had brought him was pain. Maybe it was time for some change. So Obi-Wan throws his saber to the ground and says that he's done with the Jedi way. He would join Anakin, helping him reshape the galaxy. How does this major change shift the rest of the Star Wars timeline? Well, let's keep going and find out. Anakin turns off his lightsaber and embraces his brother. He's pleased that Obi-Wan had decided to join him. Anakin looks over at Padme, appalled by his actions. He goes to her and picks her up, telling Obi-Wan that they need to get her immediate care. The pair of them board Padme's ship as quickly as they can, with 3PO and R2 quickly speeding to the asteroid base of Polis Massa in order to get Padme the urgent care that she needs. The doctors are able to nurse her back to health and oversee the birth of her children. Because Anakin is there for the birth of her children, he apologizes for his violent outburst, and Padme doesn't die of sadness. However, she's still disgusted with what Anakin has become. She knows that there is good in him, but she refuses to go along with his schemes. Anakin never fights Obi-Wan, so he never ends up needing the cybernetic suit. When Padme gives birth, the couple chooses to name the twins Luke and Leia. They also agree that no matter what happens, they'll raise the children together. Both of them were committed to creating a strong family, even if Anakin had become twisted by Palpatine's vision. Behind closed doors, Obi-Wan and Padme still talk about Anakin's well-being. While Obi-Wan abandons the ways of the Jedi, he still leans towards the light side. He doesn't believe in the vision that Palpatine has for the galaxy, but he also thinks that he can convince Anakin to break free of his spell. Padme agrees with this sentiment. They both begin to work in the shadows in their respective arenas, attempting to create trouble for the Empire that will go unnoticed in the upper levels. Anakin doesn't know about this, and he continues to serve his master, Sidious, valiantly. When Anakin first brings Obi-Wan before the Dark Lord, Palpatine is shocked that Obi-Wan would give up on the Jedi tradition so easily. He doesn't trust Obi-Wan at first, but once the former Jedi pledges his loyalty and bows before the Emperor, Palpatine is certain that Obi-Wan is serious. He commissions Obi-Wan and Anakin to go forth into the galaxy and help deal with the remaining light side Force users. And he also allows them to serve within the upper echelon of the Imperial military. Vader is the enforcer of the Emperor, and Obi-Wan is Vader's right-hand man. Anakin trains Obi-Wan in the ways of the dark side alongside his children, and Obi-Wan finds it intoxicating. He's finally able to unleash all of his negative emotions that he'd felt for years. The death of Satine, the brutality of Order 66, and the loss of Qui-Gon flows through Obi-Wan as he trains, now understanding why the dark side was so appealing. Anakin is pleased with the progress of Obi-Wan, Luke, and Leia, and he feels a sense of pride in the ones that he loves. Obi-Wan also begins to feel more of an attraction to Sidious's political ideology, seeing that perhaps the Sith were better rulers of the galaxy than the Jedi could ever imagine to be, with their love for strength, peace, prosperity, and imperialistic justice that would crush every remaining Jedi faction dared even step foot against Palpatine's empire. While Anakin is training the children, Padme continues to sit in the Senate as the representative for Naboo. With the increased presence of the Empire in galactic affairs, Many of the residents of Padme's planet perceive the Empire to be overreaching. They see their bid to take over the plasma mines as a violation of Naboo sovereignty, and many Gungans become frustrated that the Empire is poking around their planet core. Protests begin to erupt in the streets of Theed, and Padme starts advocating for her people in the Senate. Anakin pleads with her that she can remain quiet because he knows that the Empire handles dissidents with force, which was what Obi-Wan was becoming more attracted to. Anakin doesn't want to see anything bad happen to her. He also knows that the Emperor knows of their personal relationship, and Anakin believes that children will either be taken by Palpatine or punished by him for Padme's actions. This causes Padme to snap at Anakin, remarking how he used to be a man who cared about creating a galaxy filled with justice and freedom. Now, he was just a part of the system that he had once railed against. Anakin is heartbroken, and he's almost moved to violence against his wife. However, because of the small shred of Anakin left in the persona of Vader, he runs away before he does anything that could harm her. Within a few months, Palpatine gives a speech to the Senate. He states that he will be sending some of the remaining clones to worlds that had encouraged dissent in order to deal with insurrectionists and protesters. One of these planets is Naboo. Palpatine stages a false flag attack on the Theed Palace, blaming some of the protesters for the actions that result in the death of a man he'd known for his entire political career, Governor Panaka. Padme knows that these claims of revolutionary activities are absolutely absurd, so she continues to advocate for her people in the Senate. It is to no avail. Governor Tarkin is placed in charge of the campaign against these worlds, and because Naboo is a high-profile case, Tarkin assigns both Anakin and Obi-Wan to the attack. Anakin argues that there are no Jedi on Naboo, and he has no real jurisdiction in this case. However, Tarkin pressures Anakin into taking it, saying that him and Obi-Wan are still very respected by clone soldiers who fought in the wars. Tarkin believes that the two ex-Jedi at the helm will be able to get the clones to follow orders better and conduct the controversial operation on Naboo without question. When Anakin continues to refuse, Tarkin threatens to take this up with the Emperor, saying that Anakin clearly has some of his old self shining through Vader. Anakin still feels that his master will do something harmful to his family, and knows that Tarkin has significant sway over what Palpatine believes. So, Anakin agrees, and so does Obi-Wan. The first thing that Obi-Wan does after this meeting with Tarkin is run to inform Padme of the plans for Anakin to lead the subjugation of their homeworld. Padme is absolutely enraged, telling Obi-Wan that she should have resisted more and pushed back. She storms off, finding Anakin's office in the military complex on Coruscant, and confronts him. Anakin tries to convince Padme that he's only working for the betterment of the galaxy, and that Naboo needed to be liberated from extremists. Padme rolls her eyes, telling Anakin that he couldn't possibly believe the nonsense about terrorists on her home planet. Padme says that if Anakin leads this attack, two are done for good, and she would take the kids back to Naboo to never see him again. Once again, Anakin insists that he's been backed into a corner. Anakin is so frightened of what Palpatine will do to him and his family if he doesn't conform to the perfect Sith apprentice mold that he would do anything to avoid Palpatine's wrath, including the attack on Palpatine's home planet. One last time, Padme looks into Anakin's eyes with heartbreak and tears, saying that she'd once loved him before running out of the office. Anakin figured that she would be back and that they could just make up like they had before. However, when he arrived back at their shared suite on Coruscant, Padme and the children were gone. Anakin's heart sank into his shoes. For the first time since Mustafar, Anakin cried. Hey folks, if you're enjoying this story, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications as we update this channel weekly with new What If content. Now, back to the story. When Anakin returned to work the next morning and saw Obi-Wan, it was clear that Vader had fully taken over. Anakin had lost his wife and kids in one night, the only things that had been tethering him to the light side. Obi-Wan can sense the shift in Anakin, and as a more gray Force user, he's slightly disturbed. Anakin asks Obi-Wan if he's ready for the mission, and Obi-Wan replies with yes. They give a speech to all the clones who are standing by to help in their raid, and the troops get fired up. They truly believe that they're doing this for the cause of preserving peace in the Empire, and not simply for fueling Palpatine's twisted desire for more control. The Imperial fleet leaves Coruscant, headed for Naboo. As it travels through hyperspace, Obi-Wan and Anakin meditate together, visualizing their success on this mission. When the Empire arrives on Naboo, they're able to subjugate Theed fairly quickly. Naboo is not a military planet, and despite the best Imperial attempts to paint their citizens as violent insurrectionists, they're not adequately prepared for fighting Imperial forces. The seasoned clones promptly squash the Naboo protesters in Theed, and as a pacifist, Queen ends up surrendering to Anakin's forces. As an example, however, when Anakin sees the Queen of Naboo, then she apologizes for the actions of her people. Anakin shoves his lightsaber blade deep into her chest before whispering, "Apology accepted." Your Majesty, into her ear as she dies. Obi-Wan watches with a perverse curiosity, wondering if he should intervene. He elects not to, not wishing to provoke Anakin's rage. Obi-Wan begins to regret his choice to join Anakin, believing that he would be more satisfied if he had stayed with the Jedi. While the dark side was intoxicated, it destroyed his identity. This was full-on display with Anakin's behavior right here. Obi-Wan still believed that he can control his darker emotions, though, and could use them to benefit those around him. But, on the other hand, Anakin had once thought that too. The clones have a more difficult time with the Gungan warriors than they do with Theed. There's a small rebel sect led by Boss Nass that's using underwater warfare to conduct attack on Imperial installments on the various islands of Naboo. They've been destroying the Empire's plasma mining infrastructure in the planet core. Boss Nass was known to be a valiant warrior who cared for his men, and he ensured that all of his raids kept as many people alive as possible. Anakin knew that if he was able to slaughter many of Nass's Gungan warriors in front of him, the staunch warrior would surrender. Once again, Obi-Wan feels uncomfortable with this course of action, but Anakin knows that strength is the only way to defeat opponents of the Empire. Obi-Wan shrugs it off, especially knowing that this ideology was undisputed, and they begin the attack. The Gungans put up a courageous fight with their plasma weapons, but in the end, it's tough to defeat these seasoned clones, despite the fact that they killed many Imperial troops. However, the overwhelming power of the stormtroopers and the two force wields ends up decimating the Gungan population. The Aqua Troopers blast through many homes mercilessly, and with this carnage, eventually, Boss Nass surrenders. His troops encourage him to continue the fight, but he knows that his people will simply die under the Imperial hand if he does. Once again, Anakin accepts Nass's surrender, but he does so with his signature Force choke. He constricts Boss Nass's throat with a firm and firmer grip, feeling the hatred flow through him. Anakin's face contorts in fury, but eventually he drops Boss Nass to the floor of the bubble that they are in, inside of Otoh. He tells Nass to let that be a lesson to the Gungan people. They were under the hand of the Empire now. Obi-Wan monitors the progress of the Aqua clones as they round up Gungan prisoners, including Boss Nass himself. Anakin suspects that they would be thrown into Imperial labor camps somewhere else in the galaxy. Anakin continues to let his anger fester as Obi-Wan steals a bongo and they travel through the planet core to get back to Theed. He let his thoughts flow, feeling the tangible impact of the dark side in his veins. Obi-Wan questions Anakin about his path, and Anakin tells Obi-Wan that he's fully immersed in the dark side of the Force, and to call him Vader now. It seemed that Anakin's full transformation was finally complete. There's truly nothing holding back his rage. Obi-Wan nods his head, still wondering if he had made the right decision to join Anakin. He senses something amiss in Theed as well, but can't quite place his finger on it. If Anakin felt it, he showed no indication of it in his Force aura. It seemed like he was too deep in his thoughts to notice. Obi-Wan continues to feel uneasy for the rest of the way to Theed, but he doesn't quite know why. As soon as the pair arrived in the city, his stomach immediately drops. Obi-Wan knew exactly why something had felt amiss, and now Anakin couldn't help but pay attention. Standing on the edge of the city, waiting for Anakin and Obi-Wan, was Governor Tarkin and a legion of clone commandos, holding Padme, Luke, and Leia in handcuffs with blasters aimed at their backs. Immediately, Anakin draws his lightsaber. Tarkin recommends against any funny business, saying that the moment that either of them jumps towards him, the clones will execute Anakin's family. While Anakin was upset with Padme, he still loved her and wanted to save her. He asks Tarkin what the hell is going on, and Tarkin informs him that the Emperor had a test for him. Anakin is pissed off that Palpatine hadn't even had the decency to come and test him in person. Instead, he'd sent one of his political lackeys to do his bidding. Anakin's eyes are filled with malice, fully yellow, and Obi-Wan steps in. After all, he was referred to as the negotiator by many during the Clone Wars. To this, Tarkin immediately pulls out his Imperial officer's pistol and blasts Obi-Wan in the shoulder, telling him that the next shot would be to the chest. There would be no negotiating, says Tarkin. Tarkin informs Anakin that during the raid, Padme had been caught with the children supporting rebel insurgents in the area with clone commando units that had been conducting urban warfare in Theed. When Tarkin was informed that the clones had captured her, he asked the Emperor what to do with the Senator, Luke, and Leia. Palpatine had directly told Tarkin to fly to Naboo and provide Anakin with a test of devotion to the Empire. The only thing that Sidious saw in the way of fully controlling Anakin now that Obi-Wan had joined him was his family. So, his test for Anakin was to kill Padme and his kids in cold blood. Tarkin said that they were going to be executed by an Imperial court for treason anyways, so that this would be an act of mercy in reality. They could die leaving a solid legacy on the galaxy, and everyone could see them in high regard rather than as traitors against the Emperor. Anakin hesitates momentarily, considering his options. He looks at his lightsaber, and he gazes into the eyes of his wife and kids. Padme does not plead with him. Her eyes are cold, and she says only this when she looks back at Anakin. Think about your children. Her love for Anakin seemed to have finally expired. Anakin lowers his head, deeply contemplating his next move. Tarkin asks him what his decision is because the clock is ticking. Anakin looks back at him. The yellow tinge in his eyes when he was underwater killing the Gungans was actually gone. Instead, the old blue of Anakin shone through. Anakin doesn't even raise a finger. He shoves the entire contingent of clone commanders back with one thought. He then directs his ire at Tarkin, who had lost some of his characteristic confidence. Tarkin's stance is shaken. Tarkin tries to pull the trigger on Anakin's family, but he feels large pressure on his trigger finger. After a few seconds, he feels his finger snap, and he cries out in pain. Anakin then looks sharply at Tarkin and throws him backwards with the Force, slamming him into the ground below. Anakin goes to his family and hugs his children, who are incredibly pleased to see him. Anakin looks at Padme, but she doesn't return his loving gaze. Instead, she says that she hopes that Anakin doesn't expect this to make up for everything that he'd done in the past. Padme begins to walk away, calling for the kids to follow her. Anakin, despite it paining him to do so, allows Padme to take the kids somewhere else, finally realizing that his volatile nature would be dangerous in their upbringing. Anakin watches as they go, knowing that his next move must be to do something big. He looks at Obi-Wan, who's still in pain from the blaster shot, and tells him that they must seize the Emperor's throne. Anakin applies some Bacta to his brother in the Force, and it appears to heal well. The pair find one of their Imperial vessels and head back to Coruscant, plotting the usurpation of Palpatine. They decide that the both of them will attack him in his new office underneath the Senate chambers, just like Yoda had in Revenge of the Sith. Obi-Wan knows that in order to take on Palpatine, he must let go of all reservations about using the dark side. Palpatine would crush him if he showed any signs of weakness. Obi-Wan and Anakin both meditate on the trip back. When they arrive on Coruscant, they know that there's no going back. They walk into the Senate building, find Palpatine's office, and enter it. As soon as they arrive, Palpatine tells them that they performed well in Naboo. The pair bow before Sidious, thanking him for their praise. Sidious then asks them where Tarkin is, and Obi-Wan pauses briefly before only disclosing that he was indisposed. Palpatine cackles at this, and then proceeds to growl to see if the pair thinks that he's stupid. Palpatine says that he knows exactly why they were here, and he had sensed the feeling of betrayal from the moment that they'd hopped out of hyperspace. He knew that Anakin and Obi-Wan planned to betray him, and he welcomed the challenge. Anakin says Palpatine's movement immediately before the lightning came, and he had a chance to pull out his lightsaber quickly and deflect it back at Sidious. Obi-Wan force pushes Palpatine backwards, catching the Sith Lord off guard. Anakin and Obi-Wan sprint towards Palpatine, raising their lightsabers above the Sith Lord, and they stab him directly through the heart, together, before he has a chance to retaliate. Anakin says goodbye in his last moment with the Sith Master, and then pulls a saber from Palpatine's chest. Anakin and Obi-Wan had won. Their bond in the dark side was still strong. When Anakin and Obi-Wan had taken control of the Empire, they decide that they will rule together. They address the Senate, informing them of Palpatine's attempted murder of Senator Amidala. They also expose all of Palpatine's crimes from the Clone Wars, but none of their own part in those crimes, of course. The duo say that they hope to rule as well as Palpatine, and they also state that they are dedicated to an orderly empire. However, they say that they also want to see regional representation and are devoted to hearing out the Senate. They still end up prosecuting insurrectionists on Naboo, and they put more military installations on various planets to help encourage orderly conduct from citizens. How does the rule of Obi-Wan and Anakin influence the end of our story? Well, let's find out. As the years pass, Anakin and Obi-Wan navigate their rule of the galaxy in a more intelligent fashion than Palpatine did. One of the major changes that they make is deciding to invest in military funds into the TIE Defender program rather than Stardust, which leads to air superiority over rebels in dogfights and also leads to the dissolution of many rebel groups. There are less rebels as well, because Anakin and Obi-Wan ensure that their public images are immaculate. They also implement more social programs than Palpatine does in the main timeline, in an attempt to try and satisfy their population. Anakin and Padme never get back together. Padme still advocates for Naboo in the Senate, because it conveniently was never revealed that she had been aiding insurgents, or rather protesters, on her homeworld who were fighting back against Imperial overreach. Many of her bills pass in the Senate, and are affirmed by the dual emperors. Padme secretly sends Luke and Leia off to Yoda on Dagobah, hoping that he can teach them more about the ways of the Force so that one day they would be able to defend themselves against their father if he ever snapped again. The galaxy is in a relative state of stability. While there are smaller groups who fight against Anakin and Obi-Wan, most of the galaxy sees them as Clone Wars war heroes who usurped a corrupt dictator and began to usher in a new golden age for the galaxy. Things seem to be looking up for everyone, even Anakin, who begins to lean more into the light side after his encounter with Tarkin on Naboo. Seeing Anakin happy pleases Obi-Wan, and the two remain brothers, ruling the galaxy side by side and truly encouraging peace to flourish.